Good morning. Okay, so today I'd like to talk about Avraham's age, how old he was when he began his spiritual journey. And it seems like a very, frankly, unimportant thing. It seems like something, I don't know, my children would talk about, like, 4.5, 4 3/4, 4 and, what do they say, like 4 and 2 halves or something. I don't know. They have all these funny terms which are completely mathematically incorrect. But like, who cares? Who cares how old he was? Does it really make a difference? But as we'll see, there's actually quite a lot of literature around the age of Avram when he began the spiritual journey, and I think it has some significant implications for us. So we'll go through a medrash which begins this discussion, and then go through the Rambam, who normally would not in his halachic work focus on something like the age of Avram. The Rambam in his halachic work, Avram was very focused on what is the bottom line. He doesn't usually get into stories. When it comes to Avram, as we'll see, we'll read it together, he goes into a story, which in and of itself is odd. It's a book about Jewish practice, Jewish law, and it's not usually so narrative-based. And at the same time, he also mentions he gets into a little bit about the ages. So we'll get to the Rambam. I'll give you a little bit of introduction about the Rambam so we can understand the complexity and hopefully come to some form of resolution. Okay. So with that, let's begin with a medrash. The medrash cites a debate about how old Avram is. Okay. So we're on the first page in Bereshis Rabbah 64:4. Ekev asher shama Avram bekoli. So the Torah tells us that God says, because Avram listened to my voice. Okay, so God clearly says that Avram listened to my voice. So, we know that from the text, but this is the springboard of the Medrash. The Medrash says, Rav Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina, Tarvayu Amri, both Rav Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina both say, Ben Arba'im Ushmona Shana, Hikir Avraham Esboro. That Avram was 48 years old when he recognized his Creator. Now, it's worth noting that the number 48 is a very strange and random age. Like, what's significant about that, right? 48, we in Jewish practice and even in the society at large, we have notions like, a certain age, right? There's a famous Mishnah in Pirkei Avos which says like 40 for, 20 for this and 30 for this, and you hit a certain age, you have a certain level of wisdom. So 48 seems like a very strange number. It's like a little bit too precise. We'll come back to that, okay? Reish Lakish Amar ben Shalosh Shanim Hikir Avraham Esboro. Reish Lakish says that Avram was 3 years old when he recognized his Creator. Okay, so big discrepancy. One has him as an adult, a mature adult, right? 48, and the other has him as a toddler, a 3-year-old, a precocious little 3-year-old, right? So again, we have to ask ourselves, why are our sages spending the time to tell us how old he is? What are they trying to convey? And I think already you could probably start to think in our heads what messages they might be trying to convey. But before we do that, I just want to mention that the Rambam himself has a slightly different text. If you look at the Kesef Mishnah, which is one of the commentators on the Rambam, the Kesef Mishnah writes, V'tzarach lomar, Shahaya Gores, Rav Yochanan, V'Rabbi Chanina D'Amri Tarvayu. So in the Rambam's text, he had a different text where it has Rav Yochanan and Rav Chanina, where they both say not 48, but rather Ben Arba'im Shana Hikir Avraham Esboro, that Avram was 40 years old. Now this is a little bit easier to understand why, because probably one of the best examples. Where's the number 40 show up in Jewish? I'm going to say tradition, maybe not like early literature, but tradition. There's a famous law that many quotes about being 40 years old. Anybody? So.
You're not supposed to learn mystical.
That's right. Ding, ding, ding. That's right. You're not supposed to learn Kabbalah, Zohar. You're not supposed to learn mystical writings until you're 40 years old. What's that all about? So that's, I would say, modern from a Jewish perspective. It goes back a few hundred years, but this really was in many ways influenced after Shabtai Tzvi, who was this false messianic figure who wreaked havoc among the Jewish people. So after his downfall, many rabbis said you should wait till you're 40, till you're more mature to be able to take this knowledge base. But the point is that 40, where they were coming from is that 40 represents a certain level of maturity, of wisdom. You're, still young, but a sense of like, don't have the, a little bit more mature, right? 40 has a certain maturity. So the Rambam's number we understand, right? The Rambam's number we understand that 40, so basically, is saying that there's some level of maturity there. I do want to just mention a fascinating calculation made by Rabbi Menachem Leibtag. He points out, he does a lot of math. I'm not a math person, so you could check this up yourself to double check it. But he points out, if you do the math, Avram was 48. He justifies the text, right? The Rambam's text of 40 is easier for us to understand. But Rabbi Leibtag justifies the text that says 48. He says he does the math, and he points out that Avram was 48 at the same time that the Tower of Babel fell. Okay, which you can imagine if you were living during that time, that was the from bold words on the front of the New York Times, like, this is big news, right? And the whole civilization, or at least in that region, is building this huge tower, and all of a sudden there's chaos, new languages. It's crazy. It's such a cataclysmic event, and it's specifically at that point that Avram is 48, and that, he suggests, is what's going on over here. So what would the message then be? The message would be that the whole world witnessed something supernatural, where all of a sudden everyone's speaking one language, and now they're speaking all these different languages, where they were building this tower, and the whole thing comes to naught. Like, something big happened. Most people just went on with their lives, and what makes Avram special was he read the news. It wasn't just interesting. He wasn't just like sharing funny memes with like his friends, but he went ahead and he introspected, and he said, how could this happen? Why would this happen? Is there a reason? Is this random? How could it be random? And use the big event to really change himself dramatically, which that's a powerful lesson, right? And we can understand that the idea behind 48, we can understand Rish Lakish is basically conveying to us that what put Avram on his path and what we could learn from him to follow in his footsteps is that when big things happen, and we're living during a time where there's like a lot of big things happening, is we can't just read the news and say, oh, okay, and say maybe a chapter of Tehillim and move on, but like, it should move us. It should really move us. It should really change us. That's where Avram began his journey, by looking at the world with serious eyes, by reading the news with a certain seriousness, and that would be the lesson. Okay, but let's get back to the Rambam and the age 40. So let me ask, whenever, so I want to just make a general comment about Midrashim. Bereshis Rabbah is one of the most classic, established, important bodies of midrashic literature. Just to give a little more context, midrashim were written around, the authors of the midrashim are the same people quoted in the midrashim are the people quoted in the Mishnah. So the sources go back in terms of like when it was really starts to get organized, goes back till around about the year 250, 300, so it goes back some time. And one of the things you'll find in the midrashim is like a lot of fantastical type of stories. Okay, you'll have people who are described as being like 100 feet tall, and you'll have like things which just defy all of our understanding, right? And the question is, how do we approach midrashim? Okay, so as a product of Jewish day school, we're typically taught midrashim at face value. This and this happened. This is what the Medrash says, and this is what happened, right? As we'll see, the Rambam very much does not take that approach. So I'll just read to you a quote from the Rambam. He writes this in one section of his commentary on Mishnah. He says, you must know that the words of the sages are differently interpreted by three groups of people. The first group is the largest one. Okay, so he's talking about the words of the sages in the context of Medrash. I've observed them, this first group, read their books, heard about them. They accept the teachings of the sages in their simple, literal sense, and do not think that these teachings contain any hidden meaning at all. They believe that all sorts of impossible things must be. They hold such opinions because they have not understood science and are far from having acquired knowledge. They understand the teachings of the sages only in their literal sense, in spite of the fact that some of their teachings, when taken literally, seem so fantastic and irrational that if one were to repeat them literally, even to the uneducated, let alone sophisticated scholars, their amazement would prompt them to ask how anyone in the world could believe such things true, much less edifying. Okay, these are sharp words, and this next line is even better. Their very effort to honor and to exalt the sages in accordance with their own meager understanding actually humiliates them. He says they're saying, you have to believe in Chazal, you have to believe in our sages. Whatever they say, take it literally, it's the truth. And they're trying to honor them. He says in doing so, they're actually bringing them disgrace. As God lives, this group destroys the glory of the Torah of God. For God said in his perfect Torah, quote, the nation is a wise and understanding people, end quotes. But this group expounds the laws and the teachings of our sages in such a way that when the other peoples hear them, they say that this little people is foolish and ignoble. The worst offenders, and it gets even worse, are preachers, rabbis, who preach and expound to the masses what they themselves do not understand. Would that they kept silent about what they do not know. Okay, this is classic Rambam with his gloves off, and he is out punching, anyone who takes midrashim literally. He says there are some midrashim which could be understood literally, but certainly the fantastical ones, things which defy all of our understanding, we should not take those things literally. It's a mistake, and it's not only a mistake, it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace to take those things literally, and therefore you should not. What is that? And he goes on, we're not going to read the whole thing, it's a long and important section, but he says, what is the goal of the midrashim? It's parables, it's stories to teach and represent deeper truths. Sometimes people, very sophisticated people, speak in parables, and the function of that is to convey a deeper idea. So the Rambam is never bound. The Rambam is never bound. When he interprets, the Rambam actually writes that he was hoping to write, he said, I plan on writing a book explaining all the different midrashim. Unfortunately, he never got around to it. He lived an exceptionally busy life. At one point, he was, I think when he wrote this actually, he was still supported. He had a brother who he loved, who was very close with, who supported him, and the Rambam did not work. The brother was a traveling businessman. He supported the Rambam. The Rambam was a scholar, full-time scholar, okay? His brother died in his boat sank, which was unfortunately fairly common. That's why people would say tefillas haderech after going by boats. And at that point, the Rambam had to start working, had to support himself, and so he became a physician. And he describes, he has this one passage where he writes how tired, an introduction to a letter, how tired he is. He says, he describes how he has to travel to the vizier. He was a part of the royal court. He has to take care of them, and then by the time he comes back, there's a line all the way around his block, and then he's so tired and doesn't even get a chance to eat. He's so tired, he's lying down, just listening to them. He can't even sit up. Okay, you have to know if that was always the case. He clearly was an incredibly energetic individual. His output was off the charts. Anyway, but he was hoping to write a book about Midrashim. My point is simply that the Rambam is never bound by the literal meaning of a Medrash. He'll read a Medrash and say, okay, it doesn't mean literally this thing had to happen. It's trying to convey an idea. So let's pause. Okay, so one thing we'll have to ask ourselves is, if you were the Rambam, if we were to put ourselves in the Rambam's shoes, how would you understand this Medrash? This Medrash said, again, Rav Yochanan and Chanina, one says he was 40, let's say according to the Rambam, and one says he was 3. Okay? So the Rambam, I believe, if there is someone here who says, this is they're arguing about ages, the Rambam would say, you're a fool. Right? It doesn't matter. They're not arguing about the age per se, and if he was 3.5 and the other one said he's 3, they would get into a fist fight. No. What are they trying to convey? What would what is the idea behind saying he was either 3 or 40? Thoughts? Yes, Ron.
I think that he acquired a taste for Hashem at age 3, and then by the time he's 48, he had solidified this. It was a process of 45 years of development.
Okay, so you're jumping ahead already, meaning in the Medrash itself, it says there's 2 opinions. One says 3, and the other one says, no, it was 40. You're merging them together. You're harmonizing, which is fine. We'll get to. You're in good company. Don't worry. You're in very good company. But in the Medrash, the simple read of the Medrash doesn't harmonize. Says one view says 3, one view says 40. Yeah. Yes.
Isn't that the same thing with Rivka? The age at which she got married. One says 3. One says something else,
Right.
There are other instances like this.
Correct. And each of those instances, I think, need to be unpacked. Meaning, what is being conveyed when we say they're 3? Again, why is the Torah highlighting that? Again, it's a midrashic literature. It doesn't say that anywhere in the Torah, But what are the midrashim trying to convey? But I think maybe to unpack a little bit of what you're saying, 3 years old, is what we would probably call, there's different approaches to emunah, to faith. And very broadly speaking, we have a category that people describe as emunah pshuta, a simple faith. A simple faith does not mean, that it's absent-minded, but it comes from an innocent, almost like an innocent perspective. Think about, my conversations with some of my children when they speak, or if you've spoken to a young child about God. Mommy, Daddy, who put the birds in the sky? Hashem did. Oh, Hashem lives. That's it. Which is basically trying to understand how the world works. How did I get here? There is this Hashem who made you. Ultimately, whatever. But the point is that it comes from. It's not there's no philosophical proofs. There's no equations. There's no long lectures. It's a basic. It's okay. Hashem exists. It comes from this very, again, not simplistic but simple place. And that perhaps is the first opinion. The first opinion is saying that the pathway to get to Hashem is this approach of emunah pshuta. The first opinion is arguing that emunah pshuta is the way to go. That when they're arguing, they don't care how old Avraham is. Who cares? In the terminology of the Gemara, it says, "Maidahava hava." What happened. Right? Is it really important to us? If it was just a matter of ages, I'm just trying to make this point clear because people know. We need to know. We don't need to know. It's completely irrelevant information to know how old he is unless there's a practical idea. So what's the practical idea? The first opinion is saying the way that a person should and could connect to God is with simplicity, is with a sense of just open your eyes, look at the world around you. That's the way you should be able to connect to God. That's the idea of being 3 years old. The other view, which says 40 or 48, is saying that no. The approach to emunah is one of sophistication, is one of intellectual pursuit, is one of studying, is one of analyzing, is one of debate. And that is the way to go, right? That would be the way to understand if they're not just arguing about ages, like how old he was, but rather if they're trying to convey to us a relevant, practical idea, perhaps what they're arguing about is, one is saying that we need to have, a simple connection to God. It's a simple understanding, simple basic questions, and an understanding coming from there. And one suggests we need to have this very sophisticated, deep understanding. Okay? Now, if you were the Rambam and you saw these two opinions and the little bit that we know about the Rambam, if you decided you want to write the story of Avram, which opinion would you choose? Based on whatever we know about the Rambam?
The older one.
Probably the older one, right? Everything we know about the Rambam, if there's a major debate, in general about how we get Emunah, the Rambam is a big proponent. His whole book, Mor Nevuchim, and forget Mor Nevuchim, but even the Yad HaChazaki speaks about, understanding God. He speaks about a deep understanding of God, not just like a very basic question, but that is consistently his view. And so you would expect that to be the case, that the Rambam would go with that approach. Now, before we get back to the Rambam, I just want to mention a couple of important tangents, okay? So, a couple of them. First of all, when we see a debate in the Midrashim, Rav Yochanan says he was 40 or 48. Reish Lakish says he was 3. How do we decide which one we kind of, so to speak, go with? How do we make that decision, right? When it comes to Jewish law, we have rule, like we know that if let's say you open a Mishnah, now you shouldn't learn halacha this way, but if you open a Mishnah and it says, the rabbis all say opinion A, and this one individual says opinion B, who do you go like? The majority view. That is our approach. Now, do we use that same system when it comes to hashkafa, when it comes to philosophy? Some say yes, but most say no. The Rambam is one of the few who speaks this how the Rambam says, those rules that we use when it comes to ruling in halacha do not apply when it comes to hashkafa, right? If it does not have a practical application, the Rambam writes in Mishnayos and Sotah, if it doesn't have a practical meaning, an application in practice, like what bracha do you make? How do you do this? Like a what do you do type of ramification, then it doesn't matter. You could choose between these opinions. And that's very refreshing, right? There's sometimes different hashkafos, different ideas, which kind of take root amongst the Jewish people. I think we probably touched upon in the past, in different contexts, the notion of hashkacha pratis, individualized protection and direction by Hashem, and some take a very, what we'll call maybe extreme, not extreme because it's an extremist, but like in the sense that Hashem is watching over every detail, and some take a much more open-ended, Hashem is watching, it could intervene, but doesn't intervene. Which one is true? The Ram would say, there's no halacha, you have to go with this approach. Okay, as long as they're coming from good sources. I had one teacher, one Rebbe, his name is Rav Mendel Blochman, he was a bit of a character, and he used to say, finds a, and he said, he meant like a kapat, finds a kapata, finds a jacket, like a Hasidic jacket, like a rabbi's jacket to hide behind. Okay, in other words, just pick it. If you want to go with Rav Kook, go with Rav Kook. If you want to go with Rav Color, go with Rav Color. Make sure it's a substantial view. Don't just find some random person who has the title rabbi and you find him on the internet. But the point is, as long as there is a substantial view, that is okay. So that's one important point when we're thinking about how the Rambam's going to interpret this text. One of them is a majority. One of them is Rav Yochanan or Chanina, who says 48. One of them says he's 3. How does he choose? How does he figure it out? He wouldn't be bound to saying, well, one's a majority, one's a minority. That is not how he approaches things like this, because this is not a halachic question. This is a hashkafic question. That's one point. I just want to share 2 other things about Emunah Pshuta, or a few other things about Emunah Pshuta, about this idea of simple faith, because they're beautiful and it's important. This term comes up a lot, this notion of Emunah Pshuta. So one, just a parenthetical, Rav Hutner, who is a brilliant scholar in the 20th century, he was a very, very, very sharp man, and he was once talking to someone about things we learn when we're young. And he acknowledged the fact that the Shema that we say every day, it's one of the first tefillos, prayers that are taught to a child. So he says, why do we teach it to young children? So he says, you may think, so he says, I'm going to quote. He says, at first glance, the second line, this may be perceived as a way of ensuring that the child remember the Shema. Meaning Shema speaks to our belief in God. So maybe the reason that we teach it to a young child is to ensure that the child remembers the Shema. He says this is true, but nonetheless superficial. The primary intent is not so much that he should remember Kriyas Shema more, it is that he should contemplate it less. Okay, I'm going to read those words again and understand, right? The primary intent is not so much that he should remember Kriyas Shema more, it is that he should contemplate it less. What Rav Hutner is suggesting is that the reason we teach Shema, which is our affirmation of faith to a young child, is because we want to have a childlike connection to faith. We deliberately teach to a child, not so much so the child will remember, not remember it, it's that our connection to God, our emunah on Hashem, should be like that of a child. Okay, this is like a whimsical way of saying it, but that's his point, is saying we teach it to a child so that it becomes more like childlike, innocent-like. When we talk about our emunah, it's not like, I don't have to start pulling off philosophy books from the thing. It's like, what do you mean? I believe in Hashem. Hashem, when I go to sleep at night, my mommy, my daddy says, like, we're going to say goodnight to God. What do you mean? In my life, right? It should be that visceral. It should be that real. It should be that authentic and warm. That's the emunah that we should have, okay? Now, one interesting question that we also have to analyze when it comes to emunah pshuta is, are we able to do this on our own? In other words, it's one thing to say that you could come to a deep, sophisticated understanding of God because you're very smart or you're studious and you could study. Is a person able to come to this place of belief simply on their own? Is that even possible? Like, for example, this is a very important question that is posed. Let's say, non-Jews are commanded to keep the 7 Noahide laws. Right? 120, they're going to come to heaven, and God is going to say, why don't you keep the 7 mitzvos? And they'll say, who? What are you talking about? Who's Noah? Right? Like, what are you talking about, right? Sounds like a good argument, right? And some say it is. Rav Elchanan Wasserman, who is the fascinating individual, he was the primary student of the Chafetz Chaim. Very interesting, sad, tragic story, but very powerful story. He was actually in America when World War II broke out. He was fundraising, and his students were back at home. And they said, you should stay here. There's a war going on. It's really unsafe to go back. He said, no, my students need me. And he went back, and unfortunately, he was killed by the Nazis while he was there. But fascinating individual, and he has a book, Kovach Shurim, and he writes over there like this. Let's just see this together. He says, every human being and this is a paraphrase, okay? Every human being can attain faith in God even without any education. One merely needs to look outside. Meaning, open the same way a child says, this makes no sense. How'd this happen? And the only way they can make sense of it is say there's a being out there. He says, everyone can do that. This knowledge of a creator with more probing should lead them to conclude that this gracious creator did not leave humankind without instructions. And he says, step 2. Step 1 is there has to be a creator. Some people stop there. I believe in a higher power. Nikuda, period. I'm done. I'll say hi to him once in a while. No. If you believe in a higher power, a benevolent, kind, caring, compassionate higher power, presumably he wouldn't leave us on this planet without any instructions. You'd assume he would tell you what to do. So someone should realize that. And ultimately, this should lead a person to believe in the Torah. Because you have to ask, hey, well, God, if I believe in God, he couldn't have just dropped us on planet Earth in this confusing world without any instructions. So let's see, there's a whole bunch of different religions, and I have to compare them and figure out which one's best. And ultimately says every human being has the capacity, in theory, to get to that conclusion. He says, this is how we can understand how non-Jews are obligated in the 7 Noahide laws, even without being commanded. Okay, then he asks, but if that's the case, then why don't we find more people, believing in God? Why don't we find more morally upstanding people? And here he adds the mic drop, as they call it. He says, if a judge is disqualified from judging due to a favor or a bribe worth a shava pruta, worth just a little bit, we are all bribed by a lifestyle unencumbered by the Torah. What he means is as follows. Rabbi Shachatavitz is my neighbor, okay? He's also the head of the Beis Din. If I were to go ahead, sometimes I see him pull up with a car full of groceries, okay? And if I were to go ahead and say, let me help you out, and take his groceries in. Nice thing to do. He's a little older than me. Fine, okay? I know how to do that. And then a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, I have a court case. Me and my, someone else have a financial dispute, and I would go to him. He would not be allowed to judge my case. Halachically, he is not allowed to judge my case because even though the value of that, I helped him with 2 bags, right, is nothing. If I went ahead, it's very, very minimal. Nonetheless, he would not be allowed to judge my case. Why? Because hashochad, bribery, blinds the wise. There is something innate. If someone is nice to us, we're nice to them. And it gets in the way. It creates certain biases. So Rav Elchanan Wasserman says, each and every one of us is bribed immensely. Why? Because if you had a choice, 2 paths, path of Torah, with a lot of rules, a path of no Torah with no rules, right? It's much more comfortable to go on the path of no Torah, right? That is an implicit and huge bribe, right? So it's shading it's not like an objective question. It's a question which has huge ramifications. And on one side, it's a life of comfort, a life of, hedonistic pleasure, whatever. Another side, it's at first glance, it's a very taxing life. And therefore he says all of us are blinded. So don't be shocked by the fact that most people do not come to this conclusion that the Moshe emes v'Toraso emes, that it's all true and the Torah, etc. We understand it. It's a very hard decision to make, not intellectually, but our emotions get in the way. Our, what we'll call our taiva, our lust, our yearning for pleasure, that gets in the way. That's his approach, okay? And I'll just mention one other thing, and then we'll get back to our discussion at hand, and that is the Ramban just points out, he says, he disagrees with one point that Rabbi Chanan Wasserman says. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman is saying the reason, what gets in the way of our objectivity, what gets in the way of our faith is our personal desire for pleasure. But the Ramban says what gets in the way of our faith is our pain. He says the biggest impediment to faith in God is not that I want to go and eat a McDonald's Big Mac. It doesn't look that appetizing in real life. It's just like, come on. That's not it. He says, you know what gets in the way of our connection to God? Us, any human being, is a person who experiences pain, a person who experiences injustice in the world, a person who is burdened by a world that doesn't seem to smile at them. That is the one thing that gets in the way of our faith more than anything else, which is an incredibly important insight. He's not, suggesting therefore it's okay, but he's giving a level of understanding, right? He's writing this in his commentary to the book of Job, to the book of Eob, saying, I get, like, we could understand where people are, it's not from an evil place or a self-serving place, egotistical place, it's coming from a place of pain. And most of the time that people do not connect to God, it's because their pain is what's causing them to have a bias. Their pain is clouding their ability to see clearly. Okay, very important insight. But let's get back to the Rambam. Okay, let's quickly review. We saw a machlokus, we saw a debate in the Midrashim. Was Avraham 3? Was Avraham in his 40s? Two opinions. We saw the Rambam will not be bound to understand it literally. He's going to certainly understand it must be representing a certain idea. We also saw the Rambam is very comfortable saying, I go this opinion, that opinion, with the regular rules don't apply. How does the Rambam take this debate in the Midrashim? Now let's turn to the bottom of the second page. If you want to, let's just read it in English together, actually. You can turn to the final page. This is from the Rambam in Hilchos Avodos Kachavim. He writes as follows. After this mighty man was weaned. Okay, that's a word you don't find a lot nowadays, but weaned means he was 3 years old. After this mighty man was 3 years old, he began to explore and think. Okay, so who's he ruling like? The opinion that says he was 3 years old. We're not done yet, though. Okay, though he was a child, he began to think throughout the day and night, wondering, how is it possible for the sphere to continue to revolve without having anyone controlling it? Who is causing it to revolve? Surely it does not cause itself to revolve. Now, is this a philosophical? Yes, it is a philosophical debate, but it's like philosophy minus 101. We're talking about, again, this is a child's question, a precocious child, but it's a child's question, right? He's coming at it with the innocence of, how does this world work? Who's guiding it? How's it happening? That's the 3-year-old's question. He had no teacher, nor was there anyone to inform him. Rather, he was mired in or custom among the foolish idolaters. His father, mother, and all the people around him were idol worshippers, and he would worship with them. However, his heart was exploring and gaining understanding. Ultimately, he appreciated the way of truth and understand the path of righteousness through his accurate comprehension. He realized there was one God who controlled the sphere, that he created, the sphere is just their word for the universe, that he created everything, and that there is no other God among all the other entities. He knew that the entire world was making a mistake. What caused them to be mistaken was their service of the stars and images, which made them lose awareness of the truth. Avram was 40 years old when he became aware of his creator. Okay, so what did the Rambam just do? You're good company, Ron. He put them together. He said he starts off when he's 3 with these questions, and he's challenging, and he's wondering, and he's looking, and he's curious, but it's only when he's 40 that he really became aware of his creator. So he basically, and again, the Rambam's not encumbered by 2 opinions. Okay, it's midrashic teaching. He merges them together. He says he started when he was 3, and there's value in starting when you're 3. There's value to that innocence. But then he says ultimately he needs to come to a place of deep sophistication, right? When he recognized and knew him, he began to formulate replies to the inhabitants of Orkastim and debate with them, telling them that what they were not following a proper path. Now he starts getting into philosophy. Now he starts getting into arguments, right? When he overcame them, fine. Let's just stop over here, right? So the Rambam understands that there are 2 stages, right? There are 2 stages. There's stage number 1 when he's 3. There's stage number 2 when he's 40. Okay, I'm going to go on a quick tangent. I'm sorry for all the tangents today. But I just want to note, before I get back to the Rambam, there is another commentator who also sees the 2 stages in the Rambam, but 2 very different stages. The Maharal of Prague suggests that there are 2 stages in Avram's outreach. He says stage 1 was what the Rambam just described. that he was debating with people. He was arguing with people. He was saying, hey, prove to me that you're, why are you bowing down to this, right? He's breaking, right? He famously breaks the idols, and he's debating people in the street corners and all that, right? That's one approach. But says the Maharal, he was not successful, right? What did they ultimately do? They threw him in the fire, right? It didn't actually ignite a movement. He was right, but it was unsuccessful. And then at one point, Avram changed tacks. And what did he do? He opened this tent, and he said, guys, come and eat. And they ate. And they said, how much do we owe you? What can we pay you? And he said, no, I care about you. I want to help you. And they, what? How could you care about me? And they wanted to thank him, and they saw in him, this is my understanding of I think the simple understanding of what took place. They saw in him that it's possible that someone could love you, even if give to you, even if you don't give back to them, even if you don't owe them they don't owe you anything. And they through him were able to see, oh, there could be a loving God. And all of a sudden, that's when his movement starts to take off. Right? So this notion of Avraham having two stages is an idea you find in different places, but different versions, two stages. So the Maharal's argument, suggestion is that debate stage, right? If you ever tried to debate someone who has a strong opinion on something else, it almost never goes anywhere, right? If you really want to, if you want to show someone that there's a loving God, show them there's loving people, right? And that was going to be much more effective, and he was much more effective. The Rambam, though, takes a different approach. The Rambam says stage number one was innocence, like a simple connection, a simple emunah pshuta, and then ultimately came to a place of a deep understanding of Hashem. Now, what he's ultimately suggesting is something that, I'm a product of the Jewish day school yeshiva movement, and people sometimes have a lot of criticism about the way emunah is taught, about midrashim are taught. They're sometimes taught in a very simplistic fashion, and they don't go into depth, and they'll quote the midrashim, and they'll take it all at face value. And people say, it's not fair, I don't understand these things deeply. I think the Rambam might actually think there's a lot of value in doing that. Because what the Rambam is suggesting is that we need to start, you need to start with a simple understanding. Thank you Hashem, wristbands and whatever, thank you Hashem for all the good stuff. I have this philosophical question, that philosophical question. Slow down. For the 10-year-old, for the 5-year-old, for even the 15 and 16-year-old maybe, it's okay. It's okay. And then you build on that, right? There's instead of saying there's emunah pshuta, there's a simple approach, or there is the deep, sophisticated approach. The Rambam is arguing and doing something out of character. He is telling us a story. He's taking two opinions, not choosing between them, but he's suggesting they both are true and they need to work in tandem. That we need to start with a certain innocence and maybe not even lose that innocence and build on that with a deeper understanding. Right? There's a beautiful quote from T.S. Eliot, which I have over here, and that is, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Right? And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Isn't that beautiful? Right? We start somewhere, we begin a journey, and then ultimately we come back to that place, but we come back to it and really know it. Right? So yes, maybe you teach a 2-year-old how to say, or 3-year-old how to say Shema, and they have no idea what they're talking about, but they understand maybe in their 4 or 5. There's a God out there. The goal is to come back to that place. We're not saying it's one or the other. We're not saying that it's one and then forget the other. It's constantly deepening that there's room and there's value in that simplicity in our emunah, and not to sometimes feel self-conscious about that. If I can't articulate, I can't argue. If someone corners me and tells me to prove to them that why I believe in God, I probably will not do a very good job. But I could speak to my personal experience and my personal connection, which is simple. It's not simplistic, but it's simple. I feel connected to God when I talk to, when I daven. I feel like He's standing there. I feel Him sometimes in my life. Is that going to work for a philosopher? No, but it's okay. It's more than okay. The Rambam says that's where it starts, and not only where it starts, that's where it ends, right? In other words, yes, then you can't just stop there. You can't just have a 10-year-old education or an 18-year-old education. You need to deepen it and deepen it and deepen it, but ultimately we never lose sight of that innocence as well. And that, I think, is what the Rambam is trying to do over here. So I hope we understand a little bit more about how the Rambam approaches Midrashim in general, but also, fascinatingly, the Rambam, who is the grand intellectual, is arguing, when it comes to faith, yes, we need to learn more. We need to spend time understanding those proofs and developing a deeper connection to God and a deeper understanding of God and how the world works, and learning literature that, Jewish literature that explains to us why and how and all that. But at the same time, we can't lose that 3-year-old either. There's beauty and there's value in having that innocent connection to Hashem, and we can never leave go of it. Have a good Shabbos. Thank you. We'll pick up next week.